to restart. And here we are. We're back.
Cynthia.
Commercial break.
What's up, Ish?
You wanted to say some things.
I can't follow what the last person said. Was it Damien?
Yeah. It was the questioning of nature of the beast versus nature of the game, and what really changes, and can you follow those chains that you're stuck in some cases, kind of locked in place, where the beast, us, the people, we go through all sorts of changes all the time, but the game that we get stuck in, like economics, that we have a lot of candidates for, and environmental issues, a lot of these things around us become a game, and we're oftentimes using a what we are to protect who we are, and who we are can get us into some serious dangerous situations, but what we are can protect us from those situations. And then some of the main points were gender issues in the art of the hustle. That was some of what drew me over to that statement.
On some level, you're saying we operate in contradiction, certainly to protect what we value, right? We project other things, or again, I always look at it, I always say we're all hypocrites, like on some level. I always say everybody's a hypocrite on some level. And like you described, right? Most people, I remember being in a situation when I was younger, I didn't just want to survive, I wanted to thrive in this particular environment. So in order to do so, I had to project somebody that I was not. I was very extreme. This wasn't who I was in life, like what we call back in the world. I was in a situation where, I was no longer a civilian. I was 18 years old. I was the youngest person. I was the youngest person in basic training. I was the youngest person at AIT. When I got to my permanent duty station, I was the youngest person, right? So I found myself in this environment where there's like a bunch of grown men, right, that will eat you alive if you show weakness. Like they'll eat you alive. So I couldn't just become or project strength. It had to go above and beyond. It had to be extreme. Like I had to be this guy, and I was this way. And I found myself some years into it, with a lot of power. Me and Mike have had this conversation before, and I power tripped, but I had to. Like I had to be somebody that inherently I wasn't. I became this type of person, and I'll give you an example. I used to recognize signs, right? Like if you get into a confrontation, you can kind of recognize where it's going to go. People get animated, they like to yell and raise their voice. And as soon as I saw these signs, I'm just going to punch you in the face.
Right.
Like I'm not arguing with you. I'm not waiting for it to escalate into this thing. Like, oh, your voice, you raise your voice a couple octaves, your shoulders are hunched, pow. I'm just gonna punch you in the face. And it was because I had to be this extreme thing, which inherently I just wasn't. Like this wasn't my character. And I grew up in the hood, I came from the block, but I was a guy in the block who, I hung out with all the gangsters or what have you, but I'm, reading books. You know what I mean? I'm not this person. Like I didn't hustle until I was an adult. Never hustled as a teenager. You understand what I'm saying? I never lived that life as a teenager. It was post-military.
Nurtured. You were nurtured into
right.
Nature.
Yeah. Right. And when I got there, I'm stationed with people that like they'll pull the trigger. Period. If you show weakness, they'll eat you alive. So it was like, am I going to be this person that, and I didn't know what I would learn later, that like in the streets, I get a lot of respect in the streets because I'm considered a stand-up guy, not because I'm going to go out and put in work, in the terms that we know what put in work means. You understand what I'm saying? But I didn't know at a young age that strength of character, goes a long way, right? I didn't know this. Like, I didn't know that, I could just cling to who I really was and be consistent in that and not only survive, but thrive. So I had to create a persona. And I'm just speaking to what you were saying. Like I had to create something. I got in a lot of trouble because I created this persona that I was not, and I thrived with it though. Like I found myself power tripping some years into it because I was in a position of power. and I power trip. And I wasn't a good person back then. But anyway, I want to give someone else the floor. I just wanted to say that I understand exactly what you were describing from experience.
Thank you.
I was just gonna interject. Thank God that I'm seeing you through a screen after last week.
Why?
I was saying if you could tell when people are starting to raise their voice and get in conflict, thank God I'm seeing you through a screen so you can't punch me.
But I wouldn't punch a woman. I wouldn't punch anybody. I operate with extreme control. I try to be graceful, so I'm not about punching people this day and age. But when I was young, like it was a fear, right? I don't want to get into a fight and get beat up, so I'm not even going to give you the opportunity.
Yeah.
Like it's just not going to happen. You're not going to get the opportunity to hit me first. No, I was 140 pounds. It's
Oh
not
my
happening.
God, you were tiny.
I mean, I'm still, it's not happening. You know what I mean? Like,
Sometimes
soon as you got animated,
is offense.
Right?
Yeah, the best defense is an offense, and people behave differently, or animals in general, not just people. We're in a kingdom of animals that behave differently when we're in captivity. When we're in captivity, we'll demonstrate different traits that'll come out of this who versus what scenario. And it was noted the whole alpha wolf syndrome. I mean, we could call it a syndrome now. New studies prove that in the wild, wolves don't behave that way. But when they're in captivity or they're kept in smaller environments, they begin to compete with each other in different ways over different resources that don't really exist in the finite sense in nature when they do when you're nurtured into captivity. And that's why I was saying to follow the chains in that case. Can you see that you're being chained to this game that stays the same, no matter how much you change or grow or adapt or evolve, but can you follow those chains back to the source of that game that's being played on you, but even with you? And that's the hypocrisy a little bit, is that we play these games that we're put into. And in some cases we thrive, and in other cases we barely survive.
In
There's
most
a
cases,
reason why code switching is a term.
Above water. Yep. I think code switching is a great skill set. Anyway, go on.
Oh, no, I was just saying that's why I think code switching is a term. And I think that, like, it's interesting because we've been talking at school about better explaining code switching to the students, because, I mean, we're talking, like, kids who, and although realistically I don't set a good example, but kids who where, like, every other word is a curse word, like, they don't give a crap who they're around. It's like ninja this, ninja that, the fuck this.
Here we go.
Please note that I censored myself this time.
You guys, for those who are new here, you did catch that she said censored herself this time.
Censorship is an interesting topic to get into, but I think that's a different serious topic that would subtract.
That's a different problem for a different day.
But it's a part of the captivity and the game, the censorship a little bit. And we're seeing that in media right now too, where, like, some things are censored right away and they're like, oh, this is partly fake or mostly fake. And then some things sit there for a couple of days. Even some really horrible stuff where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I just scrolled into that right now.
But
So,
I think
Facebook has a shady way of determining what to censor.
Show you.
Yeah.
And what to show you.
I wasn't quite finished with my point. But, like, what I was saying is that we found that, like, code switching, like, my kids, like, let's be blunt about it, they're not going to make it in the workplace if they don't learn that you speak differently, like, when you're on a Zoom call with your coworkers than when you're on a Zoom call with your friends. Like, believe me, if I said half the things that, like, I said on this call in a work meeting, I would have long done gotten fired,
Good that you feel free here to speak your mind.
Yeah, until somebody cancels me for slippage.
Happens.
You weren't really canceled.
I know, I'm joking.
It was a funny moment where you were like, my niggas. And we'd be like, squirt. Car came to a
'cause
screeching
you
halt.
Yeah, because y'all wanted to mess with me.
Hurricane Emily.
What's the next step in this topic to keep it serious?
To keep it serious, no. We can't keep
We're
it
not
too
serious
serious.
at
Oh, I
all.
Yeah,
thought
we're
that
not.
was
It's
the name of
Friday
this,
night. We're not keeping it
podcast.
serious.
Yeah, we might break out into like some crazy okie. Like you
That's
you know.
Ish
No.
has been Ish Ish has been breaking out into karaoke recently. I haven't gotten on him enough, but he's been finding a way.
Ish has been.
Yeah, you've been breaking out into karaoke recently.
Listen.
I've noticed. Don't think I haven't noticed.
I introduced karaoke to the platform,
Mm-hmm.
and it was received well.
Very well.
I think Sam will co-sign that.
I certainly will, Ish.
So, are you saying life is a cabaret, old chum?
Yeah.
Life is a cabaret, old chum.
And good for you,
Says the
Flavor,
best
on that.
singer on this Zoom, by the way. He's the guy
we don't
that's
We don't know
criticizing karaoke.
We
As
haven't
we
heard
know
Damien.
to this day. Well, we're going to hear Damien and we're going to hear Raul at some point.
Oh, please no. Not for me, at least. Damien is probably a much better singer than I am. I'm
Oh, you don't have
bet.
to be. Singing isn't a criteria.
Okay.
Singing well isn't the criteria.
Yeah, though that's good because we were never going to get that.
It's a good exercise in humility, regardless of your level or degree in the art of singing for music.
Yeah.
And karaoke is considered a way to help unlock some parts of your spirit. It's something to question a little bit, you know, especially if you don't know the song at all. That's probably the best key to kind of go with, because you have no idea what's right or wrong about that song that you pick randomly out of a book or whatever.
I murdered a Dire Maker once. It was really bad. And it was back when I kind of figured, well, you have the words and you generally know how it goes, but that was like, I was very careful after that because I realized I did not know the melody.
My mother was a semi-professional singer in Miami, and unfortunately, my living shame is that I can't sing to save my life. So I absorbed none of that goodness from her. So.
Also, my microphone is pretty terrible, so I couldn't be too worried about what the quality of a karaoke on this platform would look like.
Speaking of which, can folks hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I can't hear you.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So Emily's a teacher. I was gonna say, were we gonna subject on opening school stuff? Was that something that we were talking about, or did I may have
introduce the subject?
Oh.
Yeah. Well, Emily, if you would, I mean, you're a teacher, right?
I think that's my cue. Like, no, I was just saying earlier on before all the folks joined was that I had a very interesting staff meeting today. Side note, where I did not use the language that I use in this Zoom for public knowledge, but I only use that language with the students. But it was this Zoom meeting where they were basically like, we already had a staff meeting scheduled for 1:30 this afternoon, and then at 11:30, Cuomo made his announcement that schools in New York basically could reopen could attempt to reopen if they should feel so inclined to do so. And I think there's a lot of like misinterpretation in what he was actually saying, because a lot of people are all up in arms, a lot of teachers, and honestly, I don't totally blame them for being all up in arms about this.
Everybody see that? I'm sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
That's a very cool trans character.
Who is that?
In my favorite comic book.
Nice.
How do you know they're trans in the comic book? Is it explicitly stated?
Yes. His name is Darnell Wade, codename Dark Veil.
Dark Veil. Huh.
Dark Veil.
Is that like the old Marvel Universe profiles?
Well, yeah, she put it in the back. Cena, you know, I'm sure you're familiar with I believe the writer here is I don't want to get too far away from Emily's, you know, what Emily's saying.
60 seconds.
Cena Grace is the writer.
Yes,
And
yes, I'm familiar.
She specifically, she wrote Iceman. She dealt with Iceman coming out as bisexual, and you know, that's, you know, her angle, which I think is phenomenal. And she put this profile in the back of the book.
Cool.
Of a trans character that is a mutant and a member of the X-Men community. His name is Darnell Wade, codenamed Dark Veil. And we were talking about this earlier, and the book literally was just sitting on the top of my stack, so I just felt like I, you know, throw that in there. Very cool character.
Anyways,
right.
What I was saying was that, like, I think I can understand why a lot of other teachers are really scared hearing, like, you know, the grabbing headline of New York schools reopening, like, because that makes it sound like we're all just gonna, like, you know, fling open the doors and, like, that it's gonna look like that picture of that school in Georgia from the other day. Like, you saw the story where the kid got suspended for taking a picture of, like, all the kids jam-packed next to each other and not wearing masks. I don't think anybody that I've talked to who has the capacity to make a decision on that still thinks that, like, is that stupid to think that that's actually a possibility? But I think that, like, people are kind of mistaking it for, like, oh, school's open, we're just gonna fling the door open and everything's gonna go back to the way it was in March, when, like, we've painstakingly taken a lot of, like, number one, we've painstakingly taken a lot of precautions in writing a plan for reopening. And number two, he didn't say schools are ordered to reopen. What he said was schools are ordered to submit a plan for safe reopening to the health department, and if the health department doesn't like it, then too bad, that school has to stay remote.
Well, here in Buffalo, the Parent Teacher Advisory Board just submitted a letter asking that schools not reopen this year, that they're not even ready, that they're not prepared, that they need to have a plan in place that they don't have. And that's here in Buffalo. This happened today.
Well, that's exactly the point, though, is that I think that, like, ultimately, a lot of the places where people are freaking out will go at least, like, 60 to 80%, if not more, if not 100% remote anyways. But, like, because I think ultimately what's going to end up happening is that the health department is going to say, yeah, there's no way we do this. And that takes the heat off the government from all the parents who were, like, trying to sue about remote learning.
You know, I think somebody on my Facebook posted a meme which just asked an interesting question. Like, why are we dependent upon, you know, this remote learning where parents who may not be able to afford it have to have, you know, internet access and computers, when we could just take our public access channels and have school curriculum.
Like, why can't we put it on TV?
That's TV.
Smart. That's smart.
Right?
Well, I feel like I read somewhere that, like, that actually was done. Like,
my camera keep coming on.
Public access, right?
But that actually was done at some point. I remember reading, like, when there was, like, a much shorter lived pandemic of something, and, like, sometime in the 60s, they put school on the public access channel for, like, 2 weeks or something like that.
They were kind of smart in the 60s. They had a lot of shit going on.
I think
outside of all the civil unrest and racism.
Well, yeah, but they were also.
Just jokes, man. These are jokes.
I think here's the point, though, as well. You would need, like, I mean, I don't know how they did it back then, But these days, like if you wanted real school, like, and I'm not saying these couldn't be created, but if you wanted real school that was like tailored to like every grade level and whatnot, you would have to have like 12 separate public access channels, like one for each grade. You know
Listen,
what I mean?
the cable company, by virtue of being able to do business here, owes the public that service.
No,
Why
I-
we have public
like that
access.
I
like that.
Know what I mean?
100% no, I 100% agree with you. And if they don't owe people, and they at least owe the community something, because they really made it like a total, pardon my French, a total shit show when they said that they were offering internet to students who didn't have internet, like Spectrum. Back in the spring, they said they were offering like April, May, June of free internet to families who didn't have internet but needed to do remote learning. And like what ended up happening was that there was fine print that said, well, you can't like, if you're an existing customer who's failed to pay your bill, you're not eligible for this offer. Or if you've ever had service cut off, disconnected before for failure to pay your bill, you can't take advantage of this offer. You can only take advantage of this offer if you're a new customer, or even if like you're an existing customer and lost your job and can't pay your bill. No, this doesn't apply to you. So then like I would have students who were saying like, look, my dad or my mom or like my Aunt Betsy, who supports the whole household, is, you know, a bartender and isn't able to work during the pandemic, and we can't pay for our internet. What should we do? And my principal would just tell people, oh, well, give them the number to call Spectrum. And I kind of had to step in and explain like, well, no, most of our kids, that they can't just call Spectrum. You know what I mean? Like a lot of our kids are in families that have ran into instability with poverty previously and rendered themselves like ineligible for the offer. So who the hell is the offer really helping? You know what I mean?
I think that's why, public access channels are a solution. And even if, why not put a protocol in place where we dedicate more channels, like you said, up to 12? Like, why not dedicate more channels to, public access education? And I think it would streamline things, right? Like you could expose students to better quality education. Certainly make teachers frontline workers, make it worth their while to appear on these channels teaching these blocks. You know what I mean? I think they should be paid that way anyway. You know what I mean? But, our education, the money that we put in education, how it's spent, and the way that it's used needs to be reevaluated across the board anyway. But just speaking to television, like, okay, there's 900 cable channels, right?
More like 1,500, it feels like.
Okay, you can't take 12 and give them to people for free, even if they're not paying for cable, right? Give them a box, make sure that they have access to at least those 12 channels. You go down, you sign up, you get your box. You might have to pay like $15 or something. We're gonna make sure that those 12 channels, you have access to at least those 12 channels.
But look, like they could even do that like with digital television, with digital signals now. They can even do that like with just antenna TV, like because now
Analog.
because it's not analog anymore.
Right.
They can they have the capacity to make sub channels.
They switched over years ago. Right.
So like they could do that even.
We have the technology.
We have the technology, but I think the caveat to that is that there's so much emphasis in education on collaborative learning that it's like they're
You know what we should
probably
do?
thinking,
I got it. I got the solution. Anyone watch the Black Mirror movie where you could like choose your own adventure, where you could use the remote and you could like change the outcome?
Yeah.
Yeah, they should do that with learning. They should
I mean,
make it interactive.
how many kids, and I get what you're saying about collaborative learning, but we live in a world where hundreds of kids get on Twitch every day.
This
You know what I
is
mean?
true.
You know, they definitely can find a way. It's about motivation or enforcing at the very least in the household, right? Because kids who want to go play Red Dead Redemption or Call of Duty certainly find ways to, you know, they get on their PlayStation, they get on their Xbox, and they're communicating with people all over the country in groups. You know, they form parties, they form clans or whatever they're called. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, you know, I
But
think
can they do this if they don't have internet at home, though? That's the thing.
I'd like to also mention one other option besides the television thing. When I was a kid, I was very sick. I have type 1 diabetes, and I was constantly in and out of the hospital. So for 1 year in high school, they put me on this program which was called Phone School. And basically, it was we would dial into different classes during the day, and you'd have one teacher and like 6 to 10 students. And then once a week, a teacher would come and give you tests based on what you've studied. But I'm thinking, this is the oldest. How old is this technology? And we're not implementing
Alexander
this.
Graham Bell.
Exactly.
Wait, where was this, Raul?
This was in Miami, Florida. This was in Miami,
wow.
but I know that this was all over the country at one point. So for kids that were very sick, much sicker than I was, and kids that also had trouble in school. They were being bullied, picked on, fighting too much, that sort of thing. These were my classmates, and you would dial into different points in the day, and it was actually a relief because I didn't have to worry about missing tests and anything like that if I had a bad day.
Right.
I have a question really quick, and I'm just curious what Emily and some of you think about this. It's more directed towards Emily, but you know, what some of you think, and it could be in the realm of conspiratorial for sure. But do we think, or is it possible that private schools that charge high tuitions are influencing this idea that we have to be in school? You know, I have a friend who teaches at a school where they're losing hundreds of thousands of dollars just because kids aren't in school, because their tuition is, you know, $40,000, and we're talking high school level. You know, at Buffalo Seminary, you're talking at least $40,000 a year.
Damn.
Yeah, but kids come to Buffalo Seminary from all over the world. Right. It's a high-end school.
It's boarding school, isn't it?
Yeah, they have those who aren't from Buffalo. They have dorms. It's an all-girls school. They have people coming from as far as China. They have people coming from Africa. You understand what I'm saying? And you know, my friend who teaches there, they lost a lot of money this year. Well, they didn't lose the money, but obviously parents are feeling some type of way. We paid $40,000 and our kids couldn't finish. You know, they couldn't stay in school for the whole year. And
they didn't have Zooms, or
they finished on Zoom. They finished on Zoom.
But
many
point
still stands. Many of the kids who went back home for vacation couldn't come back into the country.
Oh, okay. And the point still stands. Why are we spending $40,000 for Zoom classes, right?
Right. That's
still,
why people, you know what I mean?
The type of way.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering, I'm just throwing that out there. Do we think there is some sort of pressure from all of these private schools all over the country that make, like, this is their revenue, this is their income?
Yes. Well, and I think it's also Betsy DeVos, to be honest.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Betsy DeVos is a billionaire heiress to a private education foundation that wants to replace public schools with their brand of whatever garbage that they want to put out.
He's definitely a poster child for incompetence and just someone who seems like she can't even...
she wants to support, like, you know, private schools and for-profit charter schools, like, for that very exact, for those two words, for-profit.
For profit.
And let me kind of like preface this by saying that charter schools are a very mixed bag and a much more nuanced situation than the media ever portrays them to be. Because as an example, like there's a big difference between for-profit and not for-profit charter schools, in the sense that, you know, like I teach in a charter school, and our state charter, like our agreement with the state, like specifically says that our purpose is to take kids who are like overage and undercredited in high school because the regular public system didn't work for them for whatever reason. And I think like we actually have a higher percentage of special ed and English language learners than regular public schools do. So I think like that there's a place for charter schools like that in society, because it helps us immensely to not be bogged down by like the stupidity of the DOE bureaucracy, because there's the full traditional DOE bureaucracy is so tone deaf to the actual needs, learning styles, what have you, of these kids. But like, so it's kind of nice to be freed from their draconian, like nonsensical regulations. But at the same time, there's also the argument for that, like a lot of charter schools kick out kids, like the very same kids that I mentioned that we do serve. So because they're for profit and they get paid based on test scores, and they want to make more money. So like charter schools are a very mixed bag, I find, and a very, like, there's really no one correct answer to them.
The problem is that certain of our public institutions should never be for profit. And the reason is that our profit is in the future citizens that these people will raise in their stead. And I have sort of the same feeling I have with corrections, that I don't think that should be a for-profit industry. It should be for rehabilitation. The reason it's not at the moment is because we have so many people under private control, under private hand control, that are for profit. They institute things in the prisons, much like the schools, where it is simply based on occupancy. And so all their rules and regulations happen in a certain way that if you get caught underneath any of the rules, guess what you get? More time in jail, more time in prison, because that makes them more money. And therefore, that corrupts the entire process of trying to rehabilitate people who maybe had a rough start in life. Maybe they didn't have a choice in the matter, but they don't have a choice anymore because they're being put into this. Schools, well, not the same, because I never want to put them in the same category.
But the school to prison pipeline is mainly a public school issue. It's the way that our public schools are set up.
But
New York City is a great example of the school to prison pipeline.
We talked. Damien mentioned that a few times that I do run economic candidates, but one of my furthest ideas that I pushed on my candidates is that education is the silver bullet. It is what solves all of our horrible, monstrous problems in society, and without it, you can pour as much money as you want into corrections. You can pour as much money as you want into community policing. It'll never work, because there's no amount of money that will solve the small issue of despair amongst the people going to your schooling. So
education and jobs, right?
Yes,
like,
because one leads to the other.
Yeah. Well, remember the famous George Bush quote, where people were in despair, as we often are, especially under Republican administrations. people were looking for ways to improve their life, immediate ways to improve their life, right? People were in despair, and he's like, "Oh, go back to school," and it's like,
The most
"Excuse me."
tone-deaf comment ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, you mean go back to school while I'm already working 2 jobs
Yeah.
to pay
2
for a
jobs.
place that I
Yep.
can't afford to live, and I'm trying to keep track of my kids and not be, not have my kids be truant in school or be accused of being an absent parent while I'm
Absentee
trying to
parent.
like work, and like, what do you
Yep.
mean go back to school? Like, what do you mean? Like, how about higher paying jobs so I can work less and, take care of my family?
My other favorite was I don't remember who said this. I think it was Mitt Romney, but the borrow money from your parents to start a business. Like,
Do what I did.
exactly. But I think that, like, that's,
All
I
you
mean,
need is
that's-
$30.
I mean, that's why I like New York City I want to speak to New York City being a perfect example of the school to prison pipeline, and that's why I like where I am teaching now, because being in a charter, we have we have more freedom to adapt and work with the kids and their life circumstances, because oftentimes and I say this coming from spending 5 years teaching in a regular traditional school before the school that I'm in now.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I don't know how much I've gotten into this with the people who have been on the call earlier, but I actually got myself into hot water with the public system because I wouldn't keep my mouth shut, and got shown the door, ostensibly because I wouldn't play along with their game. And that's why
You were fired?
well, I was trying to euphemize it, but yes.
You were encouraged to resign.
Oh no, I was told you're not coming back in the fall.
Oh.
And the way that the DOE's stupid computer systems are is that they basically, sorry to use this term because I know it has connotations, but they basically blacklist you from applying, from getting a job at another public school. So you have to go to charter or private pretty much.
Now, what was it about the system that you were bucking? How are you bucking the system, or what happened?
Well, because basically for years, how things are handled in schools have been a hot mess. And the big problem, because for years and years and years, the zero tolerance policies, suspending kids for stupid stuff, and the data of Black and Latinx students getting suspended more often. So then when de Blasio took office, he said, well, we got to end all this school to prison pipeline stuff, and made it much harder to suspend a student.
Yeah.
And which I do agree with, but the way that it was implemented had very unintended consequences, because
This is often the case.
Because instead of because they didn't add the social work and mental health support that they needed to really help the kids get to the root causes of the behaviors and change them. So what it turned into, but they made it much harder to suspend kids, and they basically started confiscating funding or threatening principals with their jobs if there were too many discipline incidents on record.
Oh, wow.
So what was the outcome?
So it was getting to a point and it was getting gradually worse every year that I was in the DOE system, where classrooms were getting harder and harder and harder to manage, because kids were getting the impression that
they could do anything.
They could do whatever the hell they want and just get sent to the And if you sent them to an administrator's office, they either sent them back and said, I'm too busy, I can't do anything, or like
Right.
you'd send them to a counselor and they would send them back 10 minutes later with a lollipop. And the kids got the idea reinforced that, you know, they could get away with things. But anyways,
What ages were you teaching at that time?
this was middle school, so you know that was going to be a shit show anyway, because they're in like the most rebellious phase of their life.
So you got to give me
put-
age groups though, because you know I'm not familiar with. I never went to middle school. I don't know people that went to middle school, so I'm just not familiar with.
11, 12, 13.
Like, yeah,
Okay.
like 12-year-olds, like 7th grade. I was teaching 7th grade.
They should have
So-
put CBD in the lollipops, but they weren't really doing CBD back then.
Or y'all could have had like a whoopee room.
But here's the thing is that like here's the thing is that basically kids were starting to run amok because since the plan to lower suspensions wasn't implemented correctly, it didn't stop the behaviors. Just telling them to stop suspending people doesn't,
Yeah.
without the social work and mental health supports in place, doesn't stop the behaviors.
Yep.
So
So it sounds like you had a situation where the intention was good, right? Like they maybe perceived that children were getting suspended unlawfully or disciplined, you know, beyond what was
Exactly.
necessary. So the intention behind that was good, and then it turned into
AFCOC measures,
exactly.
no
That's
follow
exact. But at any rate, so at any rate, it came to a point where schools were basically terrified to report or discipline kids.
I think at the end of the day, you know, if we're following money, which has been a theme at least the past 2 episodes, I think at the end of the day, we're talking about like maintaining numbers, right?
Well, yes, it was a data thing. They didn't want to report behavioral incidents because they wanted to cook the books. And
It's interesting. You find that in other fields like CPS, you know, social services, you know, when it comes to like, we call it child protective services here. I know y'all call it like AC something or other there.
yes,
But you find that same thing as well, right? I know one of the things that they struggle with is if their numbers look bad, it affects the type of funding they get every year.
well, yeah, exactly. But anyways, the long and short of it is that I had a kid who not once, but twice, and not badly, mind you, but not once, but twice, ostensibly assaulted me. Like the first time he was caught on security camera pushing a door into me. And then the second time he was talking during a quiz, and I came over and I had said, if you talk during a quiz, like, I'll confiscate your quiz. And so the kid kept talking. So I'm like, well, I'm going to follow through on this. So I walked over to start confiscating his quiz, and he grabbed my wrist and jerked it away from his paper. And mind you, like the first time the incident was kind of swept under the rug, like not written up. The kid got like a slap on the wrist. And so Des felt empowered to do something similar again later. So after the second time, like at the advice of some of my colleagues who were tenured, who backed me up on this, nonetheless, I wrote a nice professional email saying, it concerns me that these incidents are continuing to happen, not only with myself, but with other teachers. And I'd like to know what kind of consequences this kid is going to get, because he's clearly not learned his lesson, and I don't want to be punitive towards him, but I want to help him. I don't want him to think that it's like, you know, gonna be okay to just like assault someone whenever he doesn't get what he wants, you know what I mean? So like,
Yeah.
like it's not that I wanted to see him punished per se, but I felt like that like nothing was being done to kind of impress upon him that you can't just like haul off and push a door into people or cuss them out or grab them or physically assault them if you don't get what you want. So anyways, I put this in an email, I sent it back. Within like a couple of weeks, like they were basically torturing me with gotcha observations, like writing me up for like they wrote me up for like stupid shit, like sending a kid to the bathroom at the wrong time or something like that, like giving me bad performance evaluations. And then at the end of the year, they said, like, you know, because of all these bad performance evaluations that we just gave you within the past 3 months, never mind the fact that your kids get good test scores and that you had like good evaluations in previous years, we're not giving you tenure, get the F out, basically. So, and I feel like that might have been less apt to happen if I hadn't, you know, opened my mouth and put it in a document that could be accessed by central IT that said that they were covering things up ostensibly.
You had enough years in the system to get tenure at that point?
The problem is a few years back they changed, like, and this was a Bloomberg and Cuomo stupidity. They got the stupidity in their head that like there were all of these terrible bad teachers out there with tenure who were like phoning it in, which couldn't be.
Well, Bloomberg was horribly anti-teacher, right?
He was horribly anti-teacher, but so was Cuomo for a while.
Oh, sure. No, that doesn't surprise me. Cuomo's.
And they both like they concocted this whole system that basically, like, it used to be that you would get tenure automatically after you had taught for like 3-4 years, whatever. But then they turned it into this whole thing where like you had to submit a portfolio to like the central superintendent, sometimes who hadn't even met you, to be considered for tenure, and your principal had to give you a recommendation and your principal could choose not to recommend you. Like they basically made it so that people actually had to apply for tenure and gave principals the option to say, well, we think you're not quite ready yet, but you may be ready in another year, or like flat out deny it to them and like discontinue their employment.
Yeah, it was a ridiculous national wave of anti-teacher sentiment, and like one of the most underfunded industries in this country, where funding is always decreasing, to start going after teachers.
I think and the problem is that then when you get an incompetent / and or vindictive administration, like, you're going to have a problem because these people are going to make decisions. They're going to play favorites on who they recommend for tenure. And in some cases, like, it doesn't matter how good of a teacher you are. Like, they're actually, again, it comes back to data. Like, they're actually given, they're actually told that they're required to reject a certain amount of teachers for tenure, so that it looks like that they're like weeding out bad teachers. So even if everybody is a good teacher and everybody deserves it, they've got to pick a couple of teachers to, you know, quote unquote, weed out to look like they're doing their jobs. So people who speak up are the low-hanging fruit. So
I wonder how those conversations go down. Like, do the principal and the assistant principal sit down behind closed doors and they're like, okay, Who do we want to get rid of this year?
I think they legit do have those conversations, but like, point being is that there was all of this stupid bureaucracy and all about, like, you know, cooking the books and manipulating numbers to the point where, like, some of the kids that I teach, for example, the reason why they ended up coming to a charter school is because they were legit counseled by their guidance counselors at their old schools to drop out, not because the guidance counselor thought it would actually be better for them, but because the guidance counselor was told to do whatever it took to get them off the roll because they were fucking up their funding.
Goes back to that funding again.
Exactly.
And those numbers. Capitalism.
Exactly. No, it's all about, like, funding and money. Like, that's why we have standardized tests. That's why I find myself in a position here and there where it's like the students that I teach, like the students that I have, they're smart as a whip, but like they just can't get interested in school. And I can't blame them, because like I've come up on times before where I've had to, like, where they've said, you know, Miss P, why we gotta learn this? And I've said the only reasonable answer that I could come up with was because it's on the test, because I could not figure out any possible situation where they would actually use that information in real life. Like, can I think of many situations where they would use those skills? Yes. You know what I mean?
Hey, speaking of interest, does anyone know, is KD on this call?
He is. I think he might still be having, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Noise issues.
Who's still on the call?
KD. He never, like, spoke up or introduced himself. Was he on before I got on?
Yeah.
Who's actually still on the call?
Who? Damien, myself, Cynthia, Emily, Sam, Raul, and you. And then KD is just his you know, lack of avatars there. His box is there, but I haven't said anything. So before I got on, he was having issues?
Well, he said something, no, not even before you got on, like after you got on, like halfway through, he sent a message in the group chat saying that, like, his kids were running around making noise, and like like his teenage son or daughter was like belting out the lyrics from Hamilton, and he was trying to, like, get to, like, a quieter place. So, like,
Does anybody want to speak to any of the things that Emily said?
Yeah, definitely. I got a lot. So I had to take little notes because I didn't want to interrupt the stream. This was like a really good insight on some of the stuff teachers go through.
But do you want to, Flav, do you want to stop the recording and then we can go to Damien?
Yes, we're on the hour mark again.